Good evening and thank you for staying with us on KBC Channel 1. We are coming to you live from Fairmont, the Norfolk Hotel right here at Kenya's capital, Nairobi, for yet another episode of Kenya Decides, a program that seeks to every week have constructive conversations to help you and I make informed decisions when it comes to the next general election. And tonight, with less than 80 days to that particular election, we are having so much happening in our political terrain, different aspirants traversing different parts of the country to take their charm offensive, some who are affiliated to political parties, others are independent. The big question in this election has been the integrity question. As we look at some of these people who come to us to knock our doors and tell us what they plan to do for us, what is it that they offer us in terms of integrity? And of course, the other question has been, in this country, we have had a law that ought to have guided spending when it comes to campaigns. That is the Campaign Financing Act of 2013, several years down the line. How come it has not been operationalized, and what are the likely impacts of this delay? Of course, we'll also be talking about what Matiang'i said recently, the Cabinet Secretary for Interior, concerning the kind of people who may likely make the next government. Of course, recently he said that 40% of money launderers are controlling campaign funding, and at least 40% of them may end up in parliament. Should we be concerned as a country? These are some of the issues that I'll be dissecting with my panel this evening, just to talk about election funding and, of course, what the law says about this and what are we doing as a country to be able to control how much our members of parliament, our presidents, the governors, the senators are spending when they are seeking these elective positions. Join me in, just letting our viewers know some of the people that I'm having on the panel this particular night. I'll start from my far left. I'm having a sit down with Alois Kemo. He is the Senior Assistant Director of Public Prosecutions. He's also the Chairman of Election Preparedness Committee at the ODPP, and of course also he's the regional head of the Rift Valley region at the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Thank you for creating time for us.
Thank you.
All right, and we have Brenda Mdivo. She's the Executive Director of East Africa Center for Law and Justice, an expert in politics, leadership and governance, and of course a council member at the Law Society of Kenya, serves in various boards, and I can go on and on about your rich profile, but thank you for creating time for us.
Thank you for having me.
And we have Phillip Kagucia. He's the Deputy Director, Asset Recovery at the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Over 17 years experience as an advocate, joined EACC in 2010 from private practice, but in 2017 something pivotal is that he became the first lawyer in history of Kenya to successfully prosecute cases on forfeiture of unexplained wealth. And of course, I can also go on and on about this rich profile, but thank you for creating time for us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we want to get into it straight away, and I'd like to start from where Matiang'i left. And I'm sure this is something that is in the public domain. Twice he has been on record talking about his concerns ahead of this general election. And the Interior CS said that money launderers are controlling campaign funding, and at least 40% may end up in parliament. This is something that is not a joke. Should we be concerned? Let me start with you, Phillip.
Thank you, Sefrine. Absolutely, we must be concerned, because there is a nexus between politics and crime. And as far as EACC is concerned, the crime here is corruption. And there is a vicious cycle, because getting into politics is not cheap. It's very costly. So these people have to find some money somewhere. And you're looking for the money on the off chance that you will get into power. So when you're using your hard-earned money, you're not going to risk it so much in politics. But money which you have acquired through crime or corruption is what people might end up using for campaign financing, and end up in that cycle where they've invested so much, they need to get into power so that they can recoup what they've spent. And that is part of the vicious cycle I'm talking about.
So we should. 40% is not a joke. If this makes part of the next government, I mean, what are we looking at, Joy, from your perspective?
Okay, first and foremost, when I hear the minister in charge of Interior, it's under his docket that the police service holds, it's under his docket that the county security teams for. It's under his docket that the apparatus to investigate and find these people falls. When you hear him also wailing like the rest of us, it gives you a little sense of despair. Because he ought to not just gather the intelligence, but to also do something about it. So when he issued the declaration, for me, I found it to be a bit disturbing, because I would expect this is the time you should be neutralizing such elements. This is when you should be filing cases. Should have started like 2 years ago, so that by now they've progressed. So we have to also, as a government, become more serious about what action are we taking, not just complaining and being alarmist. Because for me, I looked at the timing and said, you know what, this is being a little bit alarmist. But I wish we could say that was untrue, because what he said somehow rings true.
Yeah.
Because as Philip has correctly said, people don't use their hard-earned money and throw it away. When you see people spending money recklessly, it's probably because that was not blood, sweat and tears money. That was money that was a windfall from some other place. That means there's something wrong with our entire nomenclature. How do we make money to begin with? Why is it that accessing office, public office, that ought to be service, is actually somehow an investment? Why is it so expensive to run for office? I think as Kenyans, the conversations, therefore, is not what Matiang'i has said, for example, for now, is just giving us an opportunity to think. Why is running for office in Kenya so expensive? Why should it not just be something simple? Why, I've said it before and I'll say it again, why do we pamper our politicians? Keep giving them more and more perks to make it more and more attractive. I mean, if you kitaka kuacha umaskini na kona saba, you run for office. We need to have a conversation of saying, you know what, this is supposed to be service. Can we scale it back to service?
All right.
But unfortunately, that conversation has to go back to Parliament. But that's a discussion for
another day. And his messaging has been very consistent. Just yesterday when he was addressing the who is who in business, he actually said that intelligence agencies are aware that politicians are extorting cash from prominent businesses in exchange for alleged protection in the next government. This was yesterday. And his messaging has remained on that same wavelength over time. And let's just like to, forward this to you, Mr. Kemo. Are you part of that intelligence? I want to assume you are. Are you reading the same trends as the CS is reading?
I'm not part of the intelligence, but the issue is of concern and it is very disturbing.
Yeah.
And why it is disturbing is, if we start from the Constitution, the chapter that talks about representation, it provides that we should have free and fair elections, devoid of any violence, improper influence or corruption. And what the minister said should really be of concern to the citizens of this country, because it potentially locks out people who would be competent but are poor or will not have the resources. So that the electorate in a particular constituency could have a very good candidate who would address their problems. But just because they cannot afford to compete with somebody who has the resources, they would not get to office because of that. And then you want to talk about those who are vulnerable. We have the youth who really could also be very competent people. We have the women. We have people who are suffering disability. All these categories of persons stand disadvantaged when money becomes a factor in elections. That's, for me, the reason that it is so disturbing. Yeah.
And I'd just like to pick up from where you've left. It's disturbing, and I just want to know the relationship between money and politics. There's one US-based political guru who said that money is the mother's milk of politics, and you know how precious mother's milk is. Is it that important, Philip, and why?
So here's the thing, when we passed the Constitution in 2010 and we had a dedicated chapter on leadership and integrity, that is chapter 6 of the Constitution, we were hoping that people who are sent to public office understand that that office is a public trust and that what they are going to do there is serve the people. Unfortunately, it seems as if those offices have become places where they can go, to use your own word, to milk and get money out of it. And that's why it is no surprise, and it's really embarrassing, but we have people in very high offices in government. They're resigning those positions to go into elective posts. I think there are at least 2 cabinet secretaries who have left their jobs to go and vie for elective positions. So what is it that is so appealing about these positions that you would leave a high-profile job like that, heads of parastatals? And remember, these same parastatals are being used as the sources of the funds for campaign. I am particularly distressed by one case where a head of a government agency was arrested for receiving a bribe in December of 2021. He was charged in January. By March, he had been nominated, and by May, he was in Parliament. Now think about the kind of laws that that person is going to pass when we are trying to enforce Chapter 6 of the Constitution.
All right, Joy, just to add on that, this appetite for money, this importance that is attached to money when it comes to politics and how it can propel you to even win an election, what dangers does it expose us to as a country?
Okay, we must understand that there is a role for money in politics. So, for example, if you want to run for office and you're in a political party, you want to do nominations, for example. For you to do a credible nomination process, that takes money. You have to hire agents, you have, not even agents, you have to get the polling clerks, the polling materials, so the money actually is needed for a credible political process. It's not something that we can run away from. But that is why then we have public financing that goes to political parties via the PPDT, via the political parties registrar, such that those essential functions that a political party must undertake to enhance democracy are funded by the public, because it's for the public's good. But in Kenya, our financing and our spending is over and above what is, lack of a better word, normal. In Kenya, politics is a national sport. It is a national pastime. It's not even the politicians who determine, it's the wananchi who demand certain level of, liquidity when you come to campaign. Ask anybody who's running for office now. Their biggest headache is they know even if they go for a rally, they have to have bundles of 50-50 to give out after the rally. So Kenyans have also come to know the campaign period as a milking period, as Philip has said.
You make money. This is the time to be rich.
This is the time to be rich.
How dangerous or disastrous is that?
That's where I was headed. Because now what that does is what Alois said earlier. It locks out good leaders because they cannot afford to do that. People of integrity, whose only source of income has been their hard work, you're not going to take money from your children's education fund to go and throw on a campaign trail, and it's a game of chance. It's almost like gambling. But we also have to remember what Philip started. Allow me to build on that. When we get low quality leaders who get into parliament, then we get low quality laws. And like we were saying off air before we started, the leadership and integrity chapter in the Constitution paints a picture of the kind of leaders we had in mind. Come to the Leadership and Integrity Act that's supposed to operationalize Chapter 6, then you realize the self-preservation that comes in. So, for example, that provision that says that, yes, you can be charged, yes, you can have a conviction, but until you've exhausted all your appeals, then that cannot serve as a bar for you to run for office. It tells me two things. One, people anticipate that the process in the courts is not above board, and therefore it's possible to be convicted wrongfully. So it shows that distrust in our process. But two, what it also tells me is an element of self-preservation, that the politicians also anticipate that they will fall foul of their own laws, and so create little loopholes that they keep escaping through. And this, in my opinion, is part of the problem. So the society has created a monster, and the politicians now are feeding off that whatever greed the Kenyans have, and now have also found ways and means of giving life to that. We have the third arm, I'm sorry, I should have remembered this. The third arm also has been the courts. We have several decisions that have come out of the courts that have, for lack of a better word, aided and abetted us down this journey of not having. So, for example, in 2013, when Honorable Uhuru and Honorable Ruto were facing ICC charges, it's our courts that cleared them and says, you know what, you guys are fit to run. Right now, when you're looking at Sonko, you're looking at Waititu, Aisha Jumwa, the courts are telling me, no, what, yeah, okay, fine, I know the dates are inconvenient, go campaign, come back when you're done campaigning. So this whole thing, it's a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah.
So no one person bears all the responsibility, but no one person is free from blame either.
All right, we'll come back to the judiciary later. But I want to know where these politicians get the money from. And this, I'll get a cocktail of both your responses, Philip and Kemo. I mean, what are you reading from some of these cases you're dealing with? I mean, there has been a research that has been done that has connected scandals, corruption, and politics. Do we have that in Kenya? Do you see that trend also resonating with our Kenyan situation?
You see, I think to answer your question, one would want to look at case by case, because it would be what we would refer to as proceeds of crime. And there's a whole range of areas from which that kind of money could come from.
Yeah.
It could be from, say, drugs. It could be from some illegal criminal activity, and there's so many, it could be poaching. So many criminal activities can finance our elections. And the risk that we have is, someone invests in that kind of an election with that kind of money. For me, it exacerbates corruption, because once this person gets into office, I think the temptation to recover the money they spent is very high, and they cannot recover it from the pay they're going to receive from government. And so they have to find a way of recovering that money.
So it's not free after all?
It's not free. It's not free.
The handouts.
It's not free. And then the other thing maybe one wants to look at is, I think we are too cheap as the electorate sometimes. Because these people, they really demean the voters. When you hand out 50 shillings to an individual and you expect him to sell his vote, something that could change his life forever, and just for the cost of 50 shillings, what are these people speaking about the electorate? They really look down upon, and I think there's a need for a lot of sensitization of our people, so that they understand what is at stake. Because sometimes I think they do not understand what is at stake. People have to be proud of who they are, and be ethical and moral about how they make their decisions.
All right. Philip, money laundering, extortion of business people, and promising them to protect them once you're in government. These are some of the sources of wealth that the Interior CS has cited from what he reads. I mean, what is it that you see? Where are they getting this money from where you sit?
All right. Well, from where I sit, Kemo is a consumer of my products, because when the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission conducts investigations, it does make recommendations to the DPP, and the DPP prosecutes. And for me, there is no great mystery at all. And the best example I can give you is that as we are seated here and speaking, we have 9 governors in court on corruption charges. And this represents about 20-25% of all governors in the country. That's a very high percentage, and that's probably only because we are limited by resources to respond to every report that we are receiving. And the amounts involved are colossal. There's one particular county in the former Nyanza province where the amount being discussed is approximately 2 billion. You can imagine what 2 billion would do. Until a few years ago, 2 billion was the entire budget for either the EACC or the DPP. That's a lot of money. So we are seeing these cases, we are taking them to court. But allow me to mention just one thing, and this is in connection with what Kemo says about the 50 bob and the demeaning of the voter. EACC's mandate isn't just what people see, which is the enforcement side of it, because we combat and prevent corruption. And that's done through law enforcement, education, training, public awareness, as well as the promotion of ethics and standards. Now, when creating public awareness, it's appearing on forums such as these and letting people know that some conduct is unacceptable. And there's people you can report these cases to. In a previous life, before I went back to legal services, I was in communication, and we had a very good slogan where we were talking about the example of 50 bob. 50 bob or 5 years of pain. You know, these are the kind of messages that we need to be sending
50
out.
50 bob or 5 years of pain.
50 bob today or 5 years of pain. And one message EACC has been reiterating, especially our CEO, Major Twalib Barak, he keeps saying that the citizen has a role to play. Okay? And the role of the citizen is, if the laws are falling short, they're not giving us the teeth to bite, there is one place where the citizen can take action and there is no recourse, at the ballot. So it is upon us to educate the public, to sensitize them, to let them understand that this 50 bob is not going to take them anywhere, and they can vote leaders with integrity and lock out the guys who are thugs. And just to summarize on one issue about using this money proceeds of crime to run for elections, you lock out viable candidates, decent candidates, but at the same time you open the back door for very sinister characters. Indeed, it could even be a foreign force which is financing your campaign, and at some point in future you're in a position of power. So it's really complex, and I'm just happy to mention, because I think we were in a case together with the DPP recently, the courts decided that EACC can also investigate and recommend charges for money laundering. Previously that was unclear, but as of March this year, now that is settled. Yes.
Just to stay on that matter a little bit, does it mean that the politicians have ways to outsmart the system and the structures? Because for them to even afford to use money from illegal means to campaign their politics and political activities, what are the loopholes that allow that to even happen?
You have to understand that these people, you know, we treat corruption as a white-collar crime. Okay, and it seems all clean because it's usually budgets, tenders, procurements, and so on and so forth. But it's still crime. It is still crime. And criminals are in almost all jurisdictions ahead of law enforcement, because they don't sleep. Hawalali, they're busy coming up, inventing new schemes to steal. For example, when we were able to hit them on procurement, failing to follow procurement procedures and charge them, they are now budgeting for the corruption. So you have whatever entity they're in charge of, whether it's a county, whether it's a parastatal, they have factored in what they're going to steal in the budget, because that is where we used to get them. So they're constantly thinking, they're constantly ahead of us. But the other thing I must say is that you had started by asking Kemo whether he was part of the intelligence. There are intelligence services. We have a financial intelligence unit in Kenya. It lets us members of the multi-agency task force know when there are transactions, and in that way we are able to mitigate what it is that these criminals are doing. Let's just call them criminals, because that's what they are.
All right. Joy, I mean, what does the law says ordinarily? Where should politicians get their funding, and how should they spend this money? How is that controlled within the law?
It's a very elastic question, because even how our campaign financing laws have been set up, you can tell that it was set up with elasticity to allow people to have flexibility in terms of, for example, where to get the money from. So we remember that there was a deadline by which they could not engage anymore in fundraising for the campaign, but there is nothing that stops somebody from contributing in kind to a campaign. And so right now, if you're within the political circles, you will realize many of the people who are now campaign financing are no longer sending cash, it's coming in kind. It's setting up the rallies or giving vehicles or doing whatnot, and this is a gray area in the law. Next thing is also, we don't really have limits. There were limits that were initially put, but then I think there was an amendment, and now actually all you have is a deadline of when you stop fundraising. But you can fundraise as much as you can. Now, let's not even look at Kenya for this one. Let's look at, for example, the United States. For them, a lot of their campaign financing comes from special interest groups who will go look for money and give you, because they want, once you're in power, for you to legislate or to do policy or to do something that's going to help their work to become easier. What that has done, and what we have seen also in Kenya, is that now you have government policy starting to follow private enterprise. And so people are writing laws or policies or making directions based on the interests and the things that they had already decided before the even campaign started. So what happens is this: the agenda, therefore, that you said you're going to do for the people, or what you decided that you're going to do for the people, gets lost in translation. A campaign financing, again, says because you're getting money from the fund, the political parties fund, there ought to be some accountability. But the Office of the Auditor General does not have direct access to audit political parties directly. And so they're receiving public funds, but for most of them, we're not sure how it's spent. Does it all go to paying the Secretary General? Does some of it actually go to civic education, because they're supposed to do civic education? Does some of it go towards now, for example, empowering women, empowering youth to participate in the process? So
there's no way to check.
It's very loose, such that if the Auditor General decides that she's going in to check, she sort of has to use fiat. It's like, you know, she's barging in. And if somebody said they're going to court and they're filing a petition, she'll probably be told, leave that to the political party's registrar, who does not have the capacity to do the same. So we're in a space where I think this is a growing area in law. Our laws are not clear, they're not strong, and they have been designed in a way that they're very elastic. And that's why you find at the end of the day, there's so many private interests that are able to percolate into our law. So for example, if you look at the Leadership and Integrity Act, it talks about how foreign powers should not intertwine with public officers because it may endanger our security, interests. But now the problem is this: when that happens, what's the recourse? The Leadership and Integrity Act is sort of, you shall do your best not to get entangled.
And it is open about the end result.
Exactly.
Like, what do you do?
So the Campaign Financing Act, the Leadership and Integrity Act, even the Penal Code, all these laws, that the anti-corruption laws, we need to start just tightening and buttoning them up.
All right.
And I think part of this also, the challenge goes to not just my brother sitting here, but institutions like the Law Reform Commission. We have to start looking for ways. The Law Society of Kenya, we have to start looking outside Parliament to make strong suggestions, because our laws sometimes are not fit for purpose.
Okay, thank you so much, Joy, for that. And we'll just be picking up on that particular note, the laws, and what is it that we have done as a country to ensure that these laws work for us. We'll be talking about the Campaign Financing Act of 2013. When we come back from this particular break, to stay with us, we are talking about election financing tonight. This is Kenya Decides. Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us as we talk about election financing tonight on Kenya Decides. And before we took a break, I just told you that we'll be talking about Campaign Financing Act of 2013 and even other election-related laws that ought to guide how much politicians need to spend when they are campaigning to take up political office. And when you talk about this Campaign Financing Act, it's one of the acts, the laws that were supposed to limit political campaign financing and also promote political competition. You had my panelists earlier talking about, you know, some people may be locked out, some very good and credible leaders may be locked out of this particular process for lack of money. So this is one of the things that the Act was trying to control. But this is what has happened over time. Just in the interest of our viewers, why we are where we are today. In 2013, December, so this law was enacted, and obviously it was not implemented in the 2013 general election because it came later. So in December 2016, Parliament rejects a draft of regulations on this particular act, partly because they say these regulations were presented late. They were presented in July 2016. And in January 2017, the law was deferred to 2022 due to delays in enacting the regulations to implement it. So August 2017, we go into an election without regulations in place to control how much members of parliament ought to spend. So it was open. March 2020, IEBC and the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee discussed several proposed amendments to different election laws. The Campaign Financing Act of 2013 included. August 2020, IEBC submits to Parliament proposed amendments to the Campaign Financing Act of 2013. Amendments that are still pending less than 3 months to the August polls. So 9th August 2021, according to the requirements again, IEBC gazetted the campaign spending limits. There was a heated debate about this. And 11th of August 2021, Parliament's Delegated Legislation Committee nullified these regulations. So we are still at a point of we do not know what's the way forward when it comes to this particular act. What do you read from this chronology? Let me start with you, Kemo.
I think that chronology just speaks to
what do you read? What's the deeper, what are you reading mischief. From what is happening between IEBC, Parliament, back and forth since 2013?
There is no will to deal with campaign financing, to regulate campaign financing. That is what I read from that chronology of events. And it is sad because what we are left with, for example, is the Political Parties Act, which, as Joy said, provides for political funding. But if you look at the Political Parties Act, it speaks about the requirement of political parties to disclose the sources of the funds that they get. They're supposed to carry out annual audits, just as Joy said. I do not know the last time any of these political parties carried out their audits, because that is the basis upon which anybody carrying out an investigation would know that these funds that these people are using are perhaps suspect, or they could be proceeds of crime. Mm-hmm. So if audits have not been done, where do you even tell where the sources of the funds have come from? And then the Act talks about the sources. They talk about a party can get money from authorized persons. But it does not define who an authorized person is. It just speaks about where it is very clear, for example, is they cannot get money from foreigners or foreign institutions. That is somehow clear. But, for example, if you're talking about corporations within the country, are they the authorized persons? The law is very silent on that, and corporates can also, as we've seen, influence. They are the people who have the money. They have interests that they want to push, so that they push people who would favor them after the elections. They would have policies that really favor them. And then maybe the last thing I want to mention is where it becomes even quite challenging, and Philip can speak to this, being in asset recovery. The money that is easy to trace is money that has gone through financial institutions. But I've prosecuted cases where people were arrested with millions of shillings in the boot of a car. Yeah. So if someone delivered, say 50 million to the house of or to the office of a political party, how would you get to know about it? It is difficult, and those are some of the challenges that we are facing. And I think the Campaign Financing Act attempts to address some of those challenges, but from the chronology given,
and this question I'd like all of you to respond to. So what are you reading, Joy? What is happening? Who is frustrating this process of implementing this piece of legislation?
What is missing is a lack of political will to deal with the issue decisively, primarily because those we are counting on to deal with it are the primary beneficiaries of the lack of that law. But as we have seen, even with the push with the constitution in 2010, we finally got a new constitution. There's only so long that they can kick the can down the road. Eventually, somebody is going to have to bite the bullet. Because what has happened now is we've gotten to a place where we've had all these ridiculous rafts and measures trying to deal with this issue. There's a time when the CBK decided they're changing all the notes because people have notes in their houses, and if you don't bring them out, and we thought, oh, haha, we've got them. Then guys just change the money into foreign currency. Then we decided, okay, fine. Now, if you've got more than $10,000, you've got to declare where it's come from. So now people have decided they're going to do mattress banking. As in, we've come to a place where it's become, they're always one step ahead, always one step ahead. But what it does, conversely, is that it makes life difficult for the rest of us Kenyans. You're trying to catch 50 guys, but you're making life difficult for the 50 million of us. We have to come to a place where some of our politicians have to rise above self. They just have to get to a place where they're no longer selfish. They're like, you know what? We've ridden this horse for long enough. We've enjoyed this rodeo. Let's for once do something for Kenyans. Because if we bring sense into the spending, even then they'll benefit. Elections will become cost effective. So you'll not need to be such a bad person, such a bad thief. Most of them, I'm sure, they don't even want to die because they know they're going to go to hell because of the things that they have done to get into political office.
All right.
So even for them to get to a place where we see real reform, there has to be political will. Because what I read in that chronology is that somebody is postponing a problem by not dealing with it. It's like the gender rule. Just keep postponing the problem, but one day it will become a monster. It will consume those people who are trying to ignore it now.
But why would that be the case, Philip, if in the same act there is a provision for IEBC to vary the spending limits? If members of parliament had an issue with the spending limits, they could quite easily have a conversation with IEBC on varying that and making something out that can work. I mean, why would they? It's easier to have that than not to have the law in place altogether. You know, what do you read from this?
It was interesting to listen to your narrative, because at every other sentence it was Parliament rejected, Parliament nullified, and we can see who the common denominator through the entire story is. Now, I'm not suggesting that all lawmakers are either incompetent or malicious, but it does shine a light on where the problem is, but at the same time, it lets us know that we have an opportunity to fix that. The opportunity to fix that is, as you're heading towards the election, you've just told us that it's less than 80 days. Yeah. People have an opportunity to do something dramatic, something incredible for this country by electing leaders who have integrity. And guess what? A lot of these questions which we are struggling over, these dilemmas that we are having, these conundrums that we are struggling with, they will be resolved in an instant, because we'll have a different caliber of political leadership in those places. One of Joy's pet subjects is the Leadership and Integrity Act. Again, at the center of that was Parliament, because if you go back to the Constitution, under Article 80 it says, Parliament shall enact legislation for the effective administration of this chapter, being Chapter 6 of the Constitution. But what did they do? They gave us a watered-down version. And I think there was an attempt by civil society to go to court and say that the law was unconstitutional, but you know, the judiciary felt that it's not enough to just say it's unconstitutional, because the argument was it did not meet the expectations of Kenyans. And remember, our Katiba is very aspirational. Chapter 6 is right up here. Unfortunately, the laws that came in were not up to par. Yeah. And what I am looking forward to, if you allow me just a few seconds, is a scenario where we're in government, the public sector, law enforcement, is working together with private sector, the sort of people who can influence change. The same resources they are using to influence politicians, they can use to influence politicians for good, and civil society organization. And this sort of arrangement is known as a collective action. There's a collective action theory where we all come together and we bring about change for the good of this country.
There's an interesting trend that I have observed lately, Kemo, about you know, Kenyans and even raising queries about the integrity of some of these aspirants who are coming out. And we saw even some civil society groups the other day coming out and sort of saying that they're running what they call a red card campaign. And they've red carded quite a number of politicians that are vying in this year's election. I mean, how is that protected in law? Is it even something that is going anywhere? Is it effective, this red card campaign?
I think Philip has talked about the opportunity that we have. All these gaps we are talking about in the law. At the end of the day, the voter is the ultimate decision maker. And what am I saying? You are aware as a voter that someone has been investigated, there are allegations that have been brought against that person. Yes, it has not been proved. But what does it show you? I mean, does it matter to you? Do you still want to go ahead and elect that kind of a person? Look at us public officers, as opposed to state officers, for example. If a public officer is suspected of committing any offense in the workplace, or any offense, really, they'll be suspended immediately. But what happens about these people that we're talking about? Yeah,
but
they
is it backed up by any law? The reason I asked you that question, is it even backed up by, I mean, these people are still, innocent until proven guilty. So when you red card them, is it effective?
And so that is the only option that, let us sensitize people I mean, we have so many clean people around.
Allow me to jump in over there and be the devil's advocate a little bit. I talked earlier about the fact that the Leadership and Integrity Act, when it talks about until all appeals are exhausted, there's the angle about not trusting the process to be credible enough and for it to be part of the problem. We have to come to a place where the war on corruption is not weaponized. It's not used as a political witch hunt, as a political tool. Because we are coming from the days of Moi, when the court system was actually used to lock out political nemesis, to paralyze those who you do not want to progress. And so we have seen the law enforcement agencies and the law being used as a means of settling political scores. Our judiciary has to start rising above that reputation, where the process can be above board and can be trusted, such that if somebody is taken to court and they're actually found to be guilty, we can trust the first conviction. We don't have to wait until it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, but we should be able to trust the first conviction. But the place to start is from the beginning. The process has to be something that can be seen to be fair, to be manifestly, objective. I've worked in the legal system before in my past life, and I've seen innocent men suffer on trumped-up charges that legally can sort of be proved. Because as a lawyer, if I want to find something to pin on Kemo, I will find it. I will look for it, I will find it, I will paint the picture, and we have to find a way of empowering our investigators, empowering our prosecutors, empowering people like Philip, what they're doing, such that the evidence that they come with is something that can stand the test of time. And even a person, when they're convicted, they are sure that they're convicted properly. As long as we keep sabotaging our systems, that they are not fit for purpose, then such laws, then there's a justification. Because when I was a part of the civil society that argued, what law is this you've given us? Because we worked with the CIC to come up with a watertight Integrity Act, and then we ended up with this, what we have now. And they told us, we are politicians, we are the ones who know how we use the law to... And I looked at it and I thought to myself, we are still far. And so we have to come to that place. But the red card campaign does not have a basis in law. But what it does is what in law we call it's persuasion. Let people listen to it, and if you're minded to listen, because I'll tell you something, those people who've been red carded, all of them still deserve due process. If we look at it strictly as lawyers, they deserve their day in court, they deserve to be heard, they deserve to defend themselves, and if found guilty, they deserve an appeal if it is available to them. But as a Kenyan now, you are not a court of law. Then now you can look at whatever anecdotal evidence you're looking at and see whether or not it is persuasive. But moving this conversation forward, I still look forward to a day when our politicians will be selfless enough to pass laws for good and not for their own self-preservation. Because once we get there, indeed, you might fall foul of it, but what you do is secure your children's future. And I hope that we get a breed of leaders who think like that.
Philip, just to come to you, I appreciate the revolution that this country has, is currently experiencing, especially in the war against graft. So many cases are coming up, so many things Kenyans are finding out that probably initially we were not exposed to that kind of information. Many people have been implicated in so many of these cases, some big fish, for lack of a better term, and we appreciate that vamped up war against corruption. But the cases are like this, but the convictions, what happens in between? I mean, we just have so many of them, but then the convictions, what is the problem?
Sefrine, you know, as an advocate, I deal with evidence, and I would challenge you about the evidence in terms of the number of convictions. So let me give you an example, and we should also touch on what Joy has mentioned. Our concurrence rate with the Office of the DPP is at over 90%. So for every 100 cases that are forwarded to the DPP, over 90, the DPP concurs with over 90 of those cases, which tells you about the caliber of investigators and the quality of the investigations and the recommendations that have been forwarded to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Now, thereafter, when we go to court, if you look at the numbers, and the numbers are available on our website and in our statutory reports, the conviction rate is actually 63%. Okay, it's not bad, and what we are hoping for is a day where we'll get to the conviction rates in developed countries. But the context is everything. For instance, a lot of those cases are resolved by way of plea agreements, and that's because there's such a mountain of evidence. And once you go to court, the likelihood of you escaping justice are so slim that you'd rather enter a plea agreement and say, I plead guilty, I should have gone in for 10 years, but I'll take 5 years. So those arrangements are there, including deferred prosecution agreements, suspended sentences, and so on and so forth. On the issue of whether or not the fight against corruption is weaponized, I just have a simple rejoinder in this sense. There is not one of those persons who is innocent. Absolutely none. There is nobody who has been taken to court on the basis of nothing. They have done something, and the evidence is there. But just to give you an illustration of how tricky this is, because it might be a perception issue, we have a sitting MP who is a convict. He was convicted to 67 years imprisonment. I think you know who I'm talking about. And on top of that, he has a fine in excess of 1 billion Kenya shillings. But if you look at his chronology, he was involved in some scheme. I think he was supposed to deliver maize. He delivered nothing, was paid 297 million in the year 2009. Then he joined politics. His first stint in as an MP was in one party, I think, ODM. Second stint, Jubilee. This time, I have noticed from the media reports, is that he wanted to go to another party, and then he found it a bit hot, so he has gone back. So when you look at EACC, unfortunately, EACC is right in the middle. And the Constitution refers to EACC, there shall be an independent, and I'd like to emphasize the word independent. There's an independent Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. So EACC has been doing its job since 2009. And think about it. Since 2009, this guy has been jumping left, right, and even as of today, I'm not sure which party is
where next.
As I finish, it brings me back to this, our topic for today. It is quite possible that the source of the money for him to get to politics in the first place was proceeds of crime. And I like the Red Card campaign. I know it's not based on any law, but it's an issue of sensitization to the public. And in fact, one of the characters who is in the Red Card campaign has an issue today. The police are looking for him in Bungoma. What did he do? I'm sure it was on the news today. Okay?
Right.
So the Red Card, it comes in, it fits in seamlessly with the work that we're trying to do.
All right. Because what I've asked him also touches on your docket. I would just like you also to have the privilege to add on to that. I mean, what is happening when it comes to convictions? Do you share the same sentiments of optimism and a progressive journey when it comes to this?
Of course, as we prosecute all criminal offences, and I share the same sentiments with my colleague from EACC. Our concurrence rate is very high, but overall, if you look at the ODPP, I think it is over 85% rate of conviction, and policies have been put in place, key of which is the decision to charge policy. which will really enhance our effectiveness, because we are looking at the thresholds that need to be considered. We are looking at the evidence, the sufficiency of evidence, the availability of the evidence, how reliable is that evidence when you're going to come to prosecute. We look at the public interest after you've been satisfied that there is sufficient evidence. You then look at what is in the wider interest of justice and decide. And then, of course, there's also the third test is the threshold test, where sometimes an investigator tells you, we have this evidence. It points to, the guilt of this person, but there's still some outstanding evidence, which please give us time, we will be able to. So with that decision to charge police, which I think is very transformative in prosecutions, because I've been prosecution for over 20 years, I think we are going to see more convictions going forward. The other thing we are going to be doing is enhanced collaboration with all the investigators, more use of the multi-agency forums that we have, as Mr. Kagucia talked about earlier, where we can then sit down as prosecutors and guide investigators, not direct them, but guide them, discuss the weaknesses in the cases, what evidence we need to get. And with that kind of arrangement, I'm very optimistic about the future that will drive all these criminals out of town.
Yeah. All right. So as we're just about to wrap up this conversation, I want you to talk to that most important person in this process, and that is the voter. When all this fails, are we helpless? I want to give you all a chance to just address that person in terms of what is it that should guide them in making the decision on who to elect in this coming election. I'll start with you, Philip. You are running a campaign on just empowering the masses and creating awareness on some of the issues that we've been discussing tonight. What is that single message that you'd like the voter to know when all this fails? What is it that they should do for themselves and for their future?
Yeah, allow me to start by saying that the efforts the EACC has made have not been in vain, and we are seeing the evidence in the number of cases being filed by individual citizens challenging the candidacy of some people, especially those who have been impeached. You're aware there are two matters involving the former Nairobi governor. There are two matters in Mombasa. There was one which was filed in Eldoret. There's two more here in Nairobi. So that tells you that there are few people to whom the message is getting through, that they have a role to play. And that is one manifestation of somebody taking it upon themselves to do something, to go to court and get an interpretation. If someone has been impeached, how are they going to be allowed to run again? And if you think about it in any other profession, even at this station, if the accountant who works for this national broadcaster stole money, do you think he would be recruited elsewhere? It's really as simple as that. So the work that we've done has not been in vain. The people of Kenya have an incredible opportunity on the 9th of August to vote in leaders with integrity, and at the same time to lock out people who have ethical issues.
Joy?
For me, I think my call to Kenyans is these politicians come from our society. And I always like taking the blame, for lack of a better word, the blame back to Kenyans, is because these people are our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our fathers. I mean, we are the same guys who somebody sends you an M-Pesa by mistake, and what you decide to do is to withdraw immediately so that they cannot get their money back. We are the same ones who will water down the products. Today I saw the picture of a loaf of bread that's it's almost 100 grams short. Our society in itself manifests, it oozes, it sort of feeds off corruption. We have to start a self-cleaning mechanism where as a society we find corruption abhorrent. And that way we can hold leaders to account, because we ourselves don't stomach it. But as long as Kenyans, we are happy to engage in corruption, whichever the opportunity. For example, you said all Kenyans are thieves, it's just the opportunity they lack. We have to break that jinx, because it's when we do that, then we have the next generation of good people. And I like the EACC, I think, did something even in the churches, producing a Bible study guide. the next generation has to want better. They want to have more. Our generation has gotten used to handouts, money with politics and all these things. We have to teach our children better, because if we don't, we have seen what corruption has done to our country. And as long as our society condones corruption, celebrates corruption, has proceeds from corruption as the benefit of that we derive, we are not going to change our politics, because we, the Kenyans, are the ones who are feeding that monster, and one day it will eat us.
All right, Mr. Kemo?
I think my message to the voters is just a very simple one. We have institutions in the country charged with the responsibility of investigating and prosecuting some of these cases that we are talking about. And I think I would urge the voter, number one, not to be pessimistic. Use any avenue you can to communicate to these investigative agencies, to the ODPP itself, because the DPP has the mandate of directing investigative agencies to investigate any criminal matter when it is brought to his attention. And we have a way in which we work so that even if you forwarded a complaint to EACC and maybe they felt it doesn't fall on their mandate, they can still refer it to the police or any other institution that has the mandate to investigate that matter. And then I think as ODPP, one of the things we are going to do in the next few weeks is to begin sensitizing through forums like the one you have provided for us today, the radio, media, and we intend also to do community dialogues in some of those areas which we feel will be hotspots. And through those engagements, I'm sure we'll be able to sensitize the public, also hear what it is they have to say, and perhaps address some of the issues that are of concern to them on these issues that we are discussing this evening. But ultimately, I think the decision is theirs. Even though Joy says that they are entitled to due process, as Kagucia said, nobody is taken to court without any suspicion. And that's suspicion alone, because the threshold for a voter should not be beyond reasonable doubt. I mean, once you suspect that this person, the risk is so high, it's not worth taking. If somebody is in court, I think you better let that process end before you can consider imposition of leadership.
They prove their innocence.
Yes.
Before you give them a chance.
We don't lack...
How many years will that take, though, considering how these court cases take long, you know, to conclude?
They take long, but I think we are seeing a lot of changes.
All right.
And
all right. Thank you so much.
A
very quick question. This one I'd like for you, Mr. Kagucia, to respond to. Do you feel that sometimes the electorate exerts pressure on the politicians to acquire this ill-gotten wealth?
Not necessarily pressure, because the politician has a decision to make whether that is the right thing to do or not. What I fear more is the normalization of this corruption in politics. It has become so normalized that if you go for a campaign, as Joy was saying before, people almost expect that they're either going to give money, and in turn the politician expects that he should have money to dish out. But everybody is susceptible to the same things. The pressures that a criminal undergoes through are the same pressures a corrupt person undergoes. There's the opportunity, there is pressure, and then you rationalize it afterwards. Those things everybody is susceptible to, even us ordinary human beings. That's why when we say the Lord's Prayer, what do we say? Lead us not into what?
Temptation. Yes. What a way to end it. I don't want to dilute that. Thank you so much. Phillip Kagucia, the Deputy Director, Asset Recovery, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. I was also having a sit-down tonight with Joy Brenda Mdivo, the Executive Director, East Africa Center for Law and Justice. Thank you, Joy. And of course, also Alois Kemo, the Senior Assistant Director of Public Prosecution. Thank you, Mr. Kemo, for creating time for us. And that's all we had for you on Kenya Decides, as we're talking about election financing, the loopholes. What is it that we need to do as a country to be able to seal those loopholes? Let's vet and see where these politicians are getting their money before you accept that 50 bob. Are you ready to negotiate that with 5 years of pain? That's what Mr. Kagucia said earlier. That's how we wrap it up. Thank you so much for watching. Signing out from the Fairmont Hotel right here, the Norfolk Hotel right here in Nairobi. My name is Sefrine Ouma. It's been a pleasure. Have a good night and God bless.